Today we're going to talk about something that I like, a camera that's older than I am, one that I picked up at a thrift store so that I could put it in the background of videos. This, which won't stand up on its own and leans this way when I let go of it, is the Canon L1A. It is a vintage camcorder that came out in 1991, March of 91, so a couple months before I was born. As I said, I picked it up from a thrift store about 2 years ago now. I got it because it's Canon. I mostly at that point had been shooting with Canon cameras. I really like the white Canon and the red stripe. I'm a sucker for it, what can I say? It usually means good quality, and it would look good in the background of a video. I thought I was trying to set up for any time I would record my wildlife vlogs and I did something at home, I wanted a nice backdrop. I thought a vintage camera would look cool. I actually wound up buying several vintage cameras. This was not the first one, but this is the only one that remains. From the thrift store, it was $20 or $30. It wasn't very much, but enough that I could justify going, yes, I'll pay that much to put it in the background. During the research for this, it originally released in March of 91 for 295,000 yen, which is about $2,200 in the US in 91. Adjusted for inflation, that's just under $5,000. Although interestingly, an article from the Chicago Tribune in May of 91 states that the Canon L1 is $3,000 US. So my only thoughts there is that they marked it up to cover the additional cost of an overseas market. They still have to transport it to the United States to then sell. They have to pay that cost. Another article that I found from the Tampa Bay Times in February of 91, before it released, also confirmed a $3,000 US price tag. So $3,000 in 91 would be equivalent to $6,658 in 2023. What made this camera so special, which I did not know, was an interchangeable lens. Up until that point, camcorders did not do this. For me, learning it now, this is completely standard. Not all camcorders come with interchangeable lenses, especially on the cheaper ones now. The camcorder that I own and actually use to film longer videos for wildlife does not have an interchangeable lens. But at the time in 91, this was a big deal. Interestingly, on all of the marketing I can find, a 15 times zoom is apparently standard. They had a couple different options that we'll talk about in a minute. But on Canon's own website, they show it with only a 10. What's up with that? As I said, I found some vintage brochures from back in the day where it showed this 15x and it also highlighted an 8 and even a 300mm prime. The same 300mm prime that I use today. It's really cool to see that. I did not expect to find something like that, and to see the lens that I own on this camera, fascinating. It required a big plate because this is a whole different, the VL you see here, this is a VL mount system. The other ones that they had at the time were just called EOS, but they've come to be known as the EF standard for Canon, which they have now changed for their mirrorless design for the RF standard, but that's a different video. So something really interesting I found on this is the sensor. The sensor, I had not heard of something like this. It's called a CCD, a charge-coupled device, which is very different from the standard for most cameras that I have used, which is a CMOS. But look at the size of it. And to show you this example, first, let's look at my Sony camera. This is one of the things that I use the majority of the time now when I go out looking for wildlife. At a full-frame sensor size, it's a big boy. Full frame, also known as 35mm, which was the standard at the time for SLR, not even a DSLR or a mirrorless like this one. Now, the size of that compared to this little tiny thing, look at how cute that little tiny sensor is. It's so small. It's apparently a 1/2 inch, but that little thing still packs 410,000 pixels. 380,000 of them are effectively used, whereas the other ones get cropped out. Because of its small size, when compared to a 35mm, it would make each lens attached to it a telephoto. So that 300mm prime I mentioned that I have, when adapted and put onto here, it would make it the equivalent of a 900mm, which sounds fantastic for shooting wildlife, let me tell you. Not the first digital camcorder that Canon ever made, as it turns out, that I was researching, but it apparently made a lot of improvements as compared to some of its predecessors, which I'd love to get my hands on some point to dive into more detail on those. The cassettes that would go onto here, as opposed to traditional film, were called high 8s because they were 8mm, and they were a step up in what would eventually become high definition. Something that I found really interesting about this when I was researching it was just all of the features that it had, even more so than what I could see on here. For example, DE Select stood for digital effects. You could edit special effects straight on the camera into the tape that it would take. It had certain things like freeze frame, something called art freeze, which I do not know what that is, close up, and strobe. I don't know what a strobe effect is supposed to be. Is that where it makes everything flash white? Why would you want that? But that's fascinating. Coming from my background, we basically just had one family camcorder that we made silly videos on, and that was just, if you needed to do a retake, you rewound the tape, started it there, and then recorded over. Didn't always work out correctly. So let's look over this thing with all of its various features. Interchangeable video lens, for sure. Zoom capable. You could control this lens from the camera body. That didn't always happen. Again, this is the first interchangeable video lens. But through the electronics of this, which is something that I have now with some of my video camera stuff that I use, controlling it through the camera body, it's a whole other level. You've got your wide and telephoto, so you would control your zoom here on that rocker, but there's also another one on the back here. Something else I found interesting here, title and date were two buttons that you could press there. Title and date has got to be something that you can burn onto the film itself in order to have a digital recollection of something. I don't know. Here was another little neat thing. This actually moves the physical, it is a mechanical function inside. It is moving the eyepiece so that you can focus while it's inside there. Unfortunately, it is a fully digital sensor. It is not an SLR of any kind. There are not mirrors in here reflecting it, so I cannot see anything out of it at all. Something that I've never seen a design like this before, it had the more traditional camcorder strap here where you would hold it. You've got your record button and your telephoto and wide rocker so that you can zoom your lens in and out. But then there's a whole separate grip back here where the button here, this 100% mimics a DSLR that I use all the time. You've got your shutter button there, and there's also a rocker back here, and then all kinds of buttons on the top here to look at that. It's got a little sticker on it from where I bought it from the thrift store. This was paired with something else I'll talk about in a minute. And then underneath here, we've got all kinds of more buttons. The only thing about this, it does not have a battery of any kind. I don't have any style of this older battery or an AC adapter. I might be able to get one. I did find one online, but that requires money. Something I don't really have a lot of for this. So I might be able to do a follow-up at some point to see if it even turns on. I highly doubt, even if I could get this high 8 cassette that what goes in there, whether or not it would record. I'm willing to give it a try if I can, but it does have some digital outputs here, which I might be able to plug into a capture device, and we could actually test it at some point to see what it looks like when upscaled to today's standards. Now, it did come with a filter and a lens hood already on there, including a cap, which I should be able to remove, which is good, because the first time I ever looked at it, I went, ew, that doesn't look good. And the filter itself, you can't really tell, but it's pretty gross and dirty. Thankfully, the lens underneath is clear. Somebody took care of this. Very surprised. Again, this camera is older than I am. So as I mentioned, it came with just a little tag with a 5-digit number on it. As far as I can tell, that means nothing except for someone's inventory, whoever had this. And it pairs with this Canon microphone. This is what came alongside it. I say alongside, it did not actually come mounted to it in either of these two places here, because as I found out after researching online, it's broken. There should be a cold shoe mount on the bottom of this. Interestingly, that is the same standard as long as I've been alive and still what I use on most of my things today. This has two prongs on the end of it, your standard 3.5mm, and then even smaller one, and those plug into on the camera body here on the side. There's also a volume control right there, which is interesting because you can control each left and right separately. It is a dual knob system. I've never seen anything like that before. But speaking of things I've never seen in before, this is a telephoto and wide-angled microphone. It's stereo, but also has the option to switch over into zoom. You can see they've branded it Hi-Fi Stereo. I can't get this to work. I've even tried plugging this in before, but no dice at all. I would really be interested to see how this works. I've never heard, and I couldn't find any documentation on how they actually can zoom in and out your microphone level without physically. I feel nothing maybe it's broken, but I feel nothing mechanical happening when I do that. So it's digitally changing the sensitivity of the capsules? I don't know. How's that different from just a gain switch? Again, I don't know. So that's it. These are just some of the things that I found really interesting about this camera while I was researching it. I also found out that NASA got a bunch of these and started using them. They were their primary cameras for the 90s, and they replaced their old 16mm film cameras. How cool is that? And for all those reasons, that's why this is something that I like. I got it just cheap, put in the background of videos, and then doing the research on it for this video made me like it even more to find out the history of it. It's so cool. I would love to be able to get this thing working again if I can. I will try at some point when I have some extra money to get an AC adapter, maybe get a high 8 cassette if I can find them, try to plug it in. If nothing else, if I can get it to turn on and I can get a digital signal out of it, I'll try to record a little something to put in a follow-up video.